Welcome to Longevity by Design, a podcast designed to give individuals access to the leading scientific information in the field of longevity. The ability to add years to your life and life to your years needs no opinion. Join us as we ask science to take the wheel. In each episode, Dr. Gil Blander joins a co-host and an industry expert in the field of longevity, shining a light and getting the answers to the key question: how can we live a longer, healthier life?
Hello, I'm Ashley Reaver, and I'm joined by Dr. Gil Blander. Welcome to Longevity by Design, How to Live a Longer, Healthier Life. We're produced by Inside Tracker, your science-based guide to optimizing your body from the inside out. Our guest today is Dr. Joan Mannick. Dr. Mannick is a medical doctor, researcher, and expert in aging. She has served as faculty member at Harvard Medical School and University of Massachusetts Medical School. She received her MD from Harvard Medical School and completed her residency at Brigham and Women's Hospital. She is currently CEO at Tornado Therapeutics, where they develop safer, more effective mTOR inhibitors to extend human health span. Welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ashley.
So, John, it's a great pleasure to have you. And I was trying to approach you for a few months because I think that what you are doing, the work you are doing about mTOR is very exciting and very new. And I think that our listener would love it. Before we start talking about mTOR and what you are doing at Tornado, I would like to start by you giving us some background about you. Why have you decided to become a physician? And then why have you decided to make the switch from being a practicing physician to become a scientist that basically studying aging?
Sure. And thank you, Gil, for having me on this podcast. So everyone in my family is a physician. My uncles, aunts, parents. Well, actually, my mother's a PhD. And I think the family philosophy is you have to work hard and give back. And one of the ways to work hard and give back is being a physician. So I was kind of brought up that this was something that was noble to do. But I also was considering maybe doing law and working in government and try to give back that way. And I actually spent a summer with my congressman working as an intern when I was in college. And he was a little bit to the left of center, probably maybe more than a little to the left. And what I saw is he was a really good guy and really wanted to do good things for the world, but he couldn't ever get anything he wanted passed. Everything got vetoed, I think because he was a little sort of skewed in his views. So he couldn't accomplish anything. So after that summer, I said, okay, it's going to be easier to do good for the world just by being a patient. By being a doctor, because at least I can make patients better. And so that was when I kind of made my decision. I would kind of go into the family business and be a physician. And then I was in academic medicine and I was running a basic science lab and seeing patients. But friends of mine had left academic medicine and gone into biotech and into industry. And they said, Joan, it is so interesting what you can do. You can actually make new therapies for patients, which you really can't do in a lab or while you're seeing patients. And they were loving it. And so I just decided I was going to make a career jump at the age of 50. And my father said, that's the last time you can really change careers, Joan. You should try something new. So I took a jump and I went and I worked for a large biotech company and never looked back.
And that's Novartis, correct?
No, that was actually Genzyme. Before I went to Novartis, I worked at Genzyme and then I went to Novartis.
And your focus is really on healthy longevity, improving health span. So can you kind of discuss why you chose to focus there and why you think it's imperative that we find therapies that really can increase healthy lifespan?
Sure. So when I was in academic medicine running my lab, I was reading Nature and I ran into this article by Cynthia Kenyon where she talked about the fact that changing a single gene in C. elegans could double lifespan. And she said, this shows that organisms have the capacity to live much longer than they normally do. And that one sentence, it sort of turned all of medicine as I knew it on its head. Because we've spent so much time trying to, keep people from dying in like can we keep them alive another week, another 2 weeks, another month, another year? But much longer wasn't even in the vocabulary of a physician, really. And so that got me so intrigued, and I started reading more about the biology of aging after just happening to come across her sort of editorial in Nature. And I could see that the science had gotten to the point that you actually might be able to target aging biology in a human and have so much more a dramatic impact on healthy lifespan than any kind of medicine that I was seeing practiced in the hospital and in the clinics where I was working. And that's what got me started.
Yeah, that's really cool. And when I interviewed for a postdoctoral fellowship, I decided to interview at Cynthia and at Lenny Garante.
Yeah.
So I spent the day at her lab a day. It's amazing lab at UCSF. Now she moved to Calico, but it was
Right.
an amazing experience to meet her and to meet the team. And until now, I think that's the biggest effect of lifespan expansion that we've seen in model organism, what she found. And that was, I think, in the 90s. So
Right.
long ago. So it's yeah, it's still an amazing discovery. John, I would like to start talking about the work that you are doing and specifically at mTOR. And for our audience, which might not be as educated about mTOR as us, I would love to start with the beginning and the explanation. What is mTOR and why, in your opinion, it regulates aging?
Sure. So mTOR is an evolutionarily conserved protein. So it's in a yeast, it's in a fly, it's in a worm, it's in a mouse. It's in all these species. And it regulates how our bodies respond to nutrients. So when you eat, it gets turned on. And when you fast, it gets turned off. And it's turning out, not only is it present in all these organisms, but it regulates longevity in all these organisms. So whether you inhibit this single protein, either genetically or with one drug called rapamycin, lifespan is extended. Yeast, worms, flies, mice. So its regulation of longevity is evolutionarily conserved. And that is really important because it suggests humans haven't diverged that much from these other species to think that mTOR isn't also going to regulate human longevity. And it's really exciting because it is probably the best validated mechanism regulating lifespan. There are so many labs that have shown, again, whether genetically or with a single therapeutic called rapamycin, everybody repeats this finding that lifespan is extended. And not only is lifespan extended, but these organisms live healthier longer. So there's a big opportunity for modern medicine to figure out how can we use mTOR inhibitors to help extend human lifespan.
So, John, one point that is a very important point that you said is that it's repeatedly different labs doing it in a few different model organisms. I want the audience to understand, is there any other molecule or a protein that is doing the same of mTOR, or mTOR is really unique?
I think what's unique about mTOR is the body of evidence. It's enormous. For other things, there's some species, there's some data, some labs, there's some data, but it's a little bumpy, whether, in every lab can show a particular therapeutic can extend lifespan, or it works in some species, but not other species. It's the consistent effect of mTOR inhibition, genetic, and again, this one drug, rapamycin, has this remarkable effect in every species. There isn't any one drug with that data set yet. It doesn't mean there won't be, but for now, the best validated therapeutic and target is mTOR.
Excellent. And you spoke a bit about rapamycin. So can you give again to our audience what is rapamycin? What is the history? I think that the history of how it was identified is very exciting. And how do you think rapamycin regulate mTOR?
Sure. So rapamycin was found in the soil on Easter Island. So it's a natural product in the soil. And it was originally discovered because it inhibited fungal replication. So it was originally developed as an antifungal, but they found out that not only did it inhibit fungal replication, it inhibited T cells, which are a critical immune cell, the replication of T cells. And then it sort of turned out to be better at inhibiting the replication of T cells than the replication of fungus. So it was developed as an immunosuppressive agent for transplant patients because you need T cells to reject your transplanted organ. And if you inhibit those T cells, you won't reject the organ. And then it turns out it also inhibits the cancer proliferation of cancer cells. So derivatives of rapamycin have been approved for cancer treatment. And why does it inhibit the proliferation of all of these cell types? Well, it's because mTOR, the protein that rapamycin inhibits, is what you need to produce proteins and lipids, and you need it for cells to grow and divide. So when you eat, this is the protein that's activated, and then it makes the building blocks so that T cells can proliferate, cancer cells, fungus, all these cells can proliferate. So then the question is, what does any of this have to do with aging? Well, so when you eat, mTOR is turned on. When you fast, mTOR is inhibited. And when mTOR is inhibited, cells aren't making building blocks to grow, and instead protective pathways are upregulated that are very good for us as we age. So things like autophagy. This is a process where you get rid of garbage in cells. That's upregulated when mTOR is inhibited. And so part of the benefits of intermittent fasting, which Ashley probably knows has some benefits, health benefits, is because mTOR is getting inhibited. So one of the reasons mTOR inhibition is good for aging is because you get protective pathways upregulated when you inhibit it. But the other thing that happens with age is that mTOR gets dysregulated and it gets hyperactive in certain tissues in both mice and humans. And it stops responding to fasting. It just stays on all the time. So it may be as people get older, and this has been true in older mice, they don't turn down mTOR anymore when they fast. There's no time of the day where you're getting these protective pathways upregulated. And that's why giving an mTOR inhibitor like rapamycin may have benefit, because you're turning that hyperactive mTOR down to a younger level.
Excellent. And you discussed mice, you discussed a bit human. So my next question is, what is the best model organism for rapamycin? Is it mice or the most explored model organism? Is it a yeast? Is it a worm? Where the majority of the data is coming from?
There's a lot of yeast. There's a lot. The worm is the hardest because it doesn't absorb rapamycin well. It's really hard to get rapamycin into worms. So I'd say the strongest data is yeast, flies, and mice. And now there's getting to be new data that Matt Kaberlein is generating in aging dogs as well, although that's still at the beginning.
Yeah. And for the audience, we interviewed Matt a few episodes ago, and we discussed his aging dog project. So
Yes.
If you're interested in that, please go back to that episode and you can learn more about his exciting work with dogs.
When you talk about model organisms, the most studied model organism is not a model organism, it's humans. So these rapamycin is approved and has been used in thousands of transplant patients and thousands of cancer patients. But we also have used mTOR inhibitor in clinical trials in almost 2,000 older adults now to target aging biology. So we've actually treated more humans now than probably the sum of all the mice that have been treated. And you can do this because these are approved drugs. So, you can sort of fast forward into humans.
That's really interesting and good to know. I think on the human point, I'm assuming at some point you want mTOR to be working, especially while you're growing as a human. Is there a certain time throughout life when it makes the most sense to treat with rapamycin?
That's a great question. What we've seen in our clinical trials to date is we've only looked at the effect of mTOR on improving the function of the aging immune system. We've looked at that in depth. And this is kind of counterintuitive because mTOR is approved to suppress immune function. But what we've showed is when you use very low doses or intermittent doses of mTOR inhibitors, they actually enhance immune function. But where we see the greatest benefit, we define old as 65 and above. So we said, hey, it's most likely going to benefit 65 and older, have the greatest risk benefit. You're no longer growing and reproducing usually, maybe some men may still be reproducing, but we start at 65 and let's see, that's where mTOR may be getting hyperactive because you're officially considered old. And maybe that's where we'll see benefit. But where we really start seeing benefit is 75 and above. So I think what's at least old for the immune system is starting to shift to an older age. And around the age of 75, there seems to be enough deficits in immune function that we really see better efficacy of mTOR inhibitors.
John, this point is a very important point and a point that I had discussed with a few of the leaders in the aging research in the last few months. And that's when you define that you are old and what is the inflection point. And I think that the point that you raised about the immune system that is a bit different than the cardiovascular system or the muscle system is a very important point that we are discussing between us a lot. And it's not easy to know. Is it 65? Is it 75? Why is it 65? Why immune system is later? Why your cardiovascular system is earlier? What is your viewpoint in all of that?
It's interesting. I was talking to a T-cell aging leader at Stanford, and he used to be at Emory. And he said when he was looking at aging of T-cells, so T-cells are a key immune cell type. And he was looking at when the function of these T cells starts to decline with age. And he was at Emory and he was finding 10 years ago or 20 years ago, around the age of 65, he was seeing decline. Moved to Stanford, a decade later, starts looking at the same thing. He did not see the declines till age 75. So he said he didn't know whether it was sort of an poorer urban population in Atlanta versus a, granola eating healthy Palo Alto population. So this aging of the immune system probably has to do with multiple environmental factors as well as, sort of inherent declines with age. And it may occur faster in some groups and slower in other groups.
So basically, we might need to have like a personalized aging clock or something like that for each person to decide if we need to treat, let's say, with rapamycin a specific age. When is the inflection point for each person? Correct?
Well, I would say what we're finding is I think 65 to 75, it's very variable whether you have immune dysfunction or not. But we are seeing, if you even look at when deaths occur during winter cold and during the year, if you just look at all-cause mortality, between 65 and 75, there was a study that looked at this. It's flat. You kind of have the same rate of death throughout the year. The moment you get 75 to 85 or 85 or above, there are these peaks of death during winter cold and flu season that aren't seen in the younger of the old cohort. So I think by the age of 75, everybody starts having some decline in their, or more homogeneously have declines in immune function. And I would suspect there's these same patterns in other organ systems. And I think, once you get to 90, I don't know if you guys have relatives at age 90, but you can see people who have stayed very healthy through their 80s even. It's tough to see a lot of really healthy people in their 90s. There are some, but the majority of them, there's significant declines by that age without, any targeting the biology of aging therapies that, hopefully will make 90 as healthy as 70.
One of our more recent podcast hosts, Dr. Jennifer Garrison, she really focused on the acceleration of aging in women post-menopause. I feel like it's an interesting thing to think about if that 75 age is still appropriate when you're looking at females as well, or if that should be a little bit earlier.
Yeah, we haven't seen differences between men and women, but I don't think we have a big enough population to know this. What we do see is both in men and women over 75. And again, this has to be validated. If you analyze our data to date, it's that group over 75 that has the best treatment effect. And I think we want to do further trials in that age group to make sure we can reproduce those findings.
And what is that, the treatment? What does that really look like? Is there a frequency that you should take rapamycin? Do we know that in humans? Do we know it in mice?
Yeah, it's a good question. So most of the studies we've done on the aging immune system, we actually used an mTOR inhibitor that's different than rapamycin that inhibits the catalytic site of mTOR. So this is getting kind of wonky. mTOR, all the rapalogs change the shape of mTOR to inhibit it. This is sort of blocking the active site. We just used tiny daily doses of this compound, and what we saw is 65 and above, we didn't see consistent decreases in incidence of, as a readout of immune function, incidence of lab-confirmed respiratory tract infections. But when we looked at 75 and above, we saw greater treatment effects, and we saw bigger treatment effects on decreasing severity of infection than the incidence of infection.
And for those trials, you said they're rapalogs that they're studied in now. Are you specifically looking at immune function? How would one even go about looking at overall aging in those trials?
Right. So I should step back a second. This was a program that I started when I was at Novartis. And Novartis sold a rapamycin derivative called everolimus, both for cancer patients and transplant patients. And when I got to Novartis, I was in something called a new indications discovery unit. And this was a unit of Novartis where they said, what are the areas of medicine that don't fall in the traditional buckets like cardiovascular disease, GI, oncology, where we might be missing opportunities? And can you pick one, Joan, and work on it? So I said, I want to work on aging. It doesn't fit in any of these buckets, but the science has gotten to the stage I think it can get translated to humans. And our best bet is let's take our mTOR inhibitor and see if we can make something about aging better in a human. But then you have to think, what in a small, not hugely expensive clinical trial can you study about aging? And the only thing I could think of is immune function we can probably modulate relatively quickly in a clinical trial time frame. And if we can make the immune system work better, we could have a readout of a better response to a flu vaccine. So that was our first study. We just took the marketed mTOR inhibitor, we gave it to older adults at very unusual doses that we knew wouldn't suppress their immune system, and just looked to see, do they have a better response to a flu vaccination? And they did. So that was the first evidence that if you target aging biology in a human, you can make something, the function of an aging organ system, better.
And John, can you elaborate for a minute about the rapalog that you're using and why you're using rapalog and not rapamycin? Explain to them why a pharmaceutical cannot, it doesn't make sense for them to use naturally occurring drug and so on.
So rapamycin doesn't have great oral bioavailability. And so Novartis made a derivative that gets better exposure when you dose orally. And they made this drug. So I worked at that. I had it for free. So I used the drug they made in the trial. But I would assume this drug behaves very similarly to rapamycin. So whether it had been rapamycin or everolimus, we probably would have seen the same effect.
But the effect of this drug, I assume, is much stronger, or the affinity to mTOR is much
No,
stronger?
it's
No?
just you get a little higher levels when you take the same dose of this drug. You can use a lower dose to get the same treatment effect. In fact, it's a little less potent than rapamycin, but you have better exposure. So they're very similar.
And you discussed the experiment that you done on the flu. It sounds like it's helping the flu, but recently you also looked at the effect of the rapalog on COVID. So can you discuss a bit about that?
So when we did that study of flu vaccination, we noticed in any clinical trial, you have to ask the subjects what adverse events they're having. They don't have to be related to like, are you having headaches? They have to report anything that isn't, any health issue they're experiencing during the trial. And what we noticed at the end of the trial is that people who were getting the mTOR inhibitors were reporting having fewer respiratory tract infections than the people who were getting placebo. So we thought, maybe if this is enhancing the response to a flu antigen, it's enhancing the response to lots of different antigens. And that's why there's decreased respiratory tract infections. So we did a second trial where we again looked at response to a flu vaccine, but we also, as a pre-specified endpoint, looked at how many infections people were having during this study. And what we found is that people getting mTOR inhibitors were having fewer all-cause infections, but most of the most common infections that people have were respiratory tract infections. So most of the people were having fewer respiratory tract infections while on an mTOR inhibitor as compared to people on placebo. And then we said, why? What are we doing to the to the body in general? What happens when older adults are getting this drug that's targeting biology of aging? And what was unexpected is the only gene expression pathways that were really upregulated were antiviral pathways induced by interferon. So you treat older adults with very low doses of mTOR inhibitors, and in every trial we've ever done, what you see upregulated is antiviral immunity. And what causes respiratory tract infections? Viruses. So we thought, okay, the reason we keep seeing people having fewer respiratory tract infections is because they have better antiviral immunity. That's interesting because antiviral immunity declines as we age, and that's one of the reasons COVID-19 is so severe in older adults. So this is how we eventually ended up doing a trial to prevent severe COVID-19 in nursing home residents.
Super interesting. Do you see a future where either all older adults would be treated with rapamycin or some derivative, or maybe some vaccines? There's a different vaccine that has some rapamycin mixed with it for individuals older than 75.
Yeah, so again, we've used two different. I'm using mTOR inhibitor to talk about any mTOR inhibitor we've used. So sometimes we've used rapamycin derivatives, and sometimes we've used these catalytic inhibitors. Most of the studies for viral respiratory tract infections were using the catalytic inhibitor because it actually had the greatest treatment effect, even better treatment effect in a phase 2 study than the rapalogs. But they all look quite similar, and they all upregulate this antiviral response. So theoretically, how we've thought about using this is I've told you there's these peaks of death during winter cold and flu season. So we would treat people just once a day with these very low doses during winter cold and flu season to upregulate this antiviral immunity. That may also help with the vaccine response. It could be a combination, or could just be, let's just try and get the viruses where we don't have a vaccine and help people with them.
Super interesting.
And I should say, we had a failed phase 3 trial with that catalytic inhibitor with an endpoint that was quite difficult. We had to decrease the percent of people with symptoms of a respiratory tract infection. We weren't allowed to do nasopharyngeal swabs to confirm if the symptoms were due to infection. And it failed. So we still have work to do. I don't want people to think we have cracked this nut and now we know what to do. We're working through it, but I think we're getting closer and closer to understanding how do you use these drugs to really have clinical benefit. What's the end point? What can these really do? And what can't they do? What population benefits? What doesn't?
Yeah, and that's a good example of explanation. How hard is it to bring a drug to the market or to the new indication? It's very expensive. It's taking, I don't know, 10 to 15 years and a lot of hoops to jump before you bring the drug to the market. So I want to talk a bit about rapamycin, or the ortholog of that, and longevity. And specifically, we are hearing about a lot of people that are taking rapamycin off-label and using it. So first, I would like to hear your opinion about that. And a second, I'm hearing a lot of discussion about when to take it, how often to take it, at what age to take it. There are a lot of discussion about that. So anything that you can say will be very beneficial to our audience.
So I want to address your first point too about the difficulties of development. I do think it's important that even when the trials fail, like an experiment in the lab, you learn a tremendous amount from that data set that will inform you on, okay, that hypothesis, that experiment didn't work, but you might see clues as to what to do for your next experiment. And I think drug development is the same. We learned 65 to 74 is probably not the right age. It's too variable, 75 and above. And I think all of us doing drug development can just iterate and get wiser and wiser by taking the time to analyze the data sets. And then you're asking about rapamycin. We have no data yet on who, what, where. Who should be taking rapamycin, what age, what dose, what duration, what does it help and what does it not help, what is its toxicity. That all needs to be determined in clinical trials, I think, before people start taking it. You can think of the vitamin E literature where you'd think, I'm taking a vitamin, it's going to be good for me, and it made people worse. So I'm very data driven in terms of advice. I don't think we have any proof yet for any therapeutic intervention that we know is going to be safe and efficacious for targeting aging. I think it's soon, but I would wait for that data. And until that data is there, I think there is good data. For instance, exercise and sleep are good for you. So I think eat a balanced diet, exercise and sleep, and forget the supplements right now. You don't know, is it doing more harm than good? That's unless there is placebo-controlled data showing the risk is outweighed by the benefit of any of these things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And we are trying to recommend human only recommendation that is backed by a peer review and have been done in a clinical trial. So I completely agree with you. And I'm trying not to take all of those supplementation. So everyone that listening to us, I think that we have a lot to learn from John. And sometimes something look very good from far away, but actually it might make you more harm than benefit. So be
We have
careful.
no idea. And there's this theory that because it helps a mouse, it's going to help a human. We have cured Alzheimer's in a mouse 50 million times. We have cured cancer 50 times, and it doesn't translate to a human. So we don't know yet. Some of this stuff, of course, translates, but a lot doesn't, and we have to figure it out. I think, again, I have more confidence for mTOR because it's not just the mouse, but the mouse, the fly, the yeast, the worm. Across the board, every species, it's getting help. So I think we're going to crack this one and we'll figure it out. But people should wait till it's cracked.
And how far away are we from having, let's say, good enough evidence of a clinical trial that rapamycin or a drug like rapamycin will help us to live longer? What is your opinion? Is it 5 years, 10 years, 20 years?
So I think in the next 5 years, we'll know, for instance, can an mTOR inhibitor help the function of an organ system like the immune system and help decrease severity of respiratory tract infections? So one aging organ system, the risk benefit in what population might be 75 and older, I think we can get to that. And then we can start adding data sets like, okay, we know it helps the function of the aging immune system, and there's benefit if you take it once a day in winter cold and flu. We have to prove that. But let's say we prove that. Then we could look at the aging heart, because there's data that aging heart function gets better, or muscle function, or cognitive function, and sort of put the pieces together. Because if you start getting improved function in multiple different organ systems, that can be a more broad anti-aging claim. And at a certain point, it makes sense. If all of these organ systems are functioning better, you're probably going to have healthier, longer life. But I think we have to break it down into pieces.
I think that's a very good summary of off-label supplement, let's say. Be careful and take it when it's ready, and take it for the indication that it's specifically.
The other thing I have mentioned when I talk to lay audiences, and they say, well, what can we read so that we really know what's real? And I said, when you look at any claim by any company or any ad, you have to see, was there a placebo? Because in all of our trials, we see an enormous placebo effect. So people who are getting a drug that potentially is targeting aging biology, when they're getting placebo, start feeling like they're less old. So they have more energy. They have, they'll say their vision has never been this good in 20 years. They're suddenly hearing. They're all of these things, and they're on placebo. So it drives me crazy when I hear supplements or stem cells or whatever hyped for a lot of money because 7 people say they feel 20 years younger taking this expensive thing, when there's no placebo to say, but people on placebo don't feel that same benefit.
That's a great point.
Hugely important in these studies. You just have no idea without a placebo whether your drug is doing, or your supplement, or your stem cell is doing anything.
For people that would like to take rapamycin now, instead go get some sugar pills and just convince yourself that that's what you're taking, and you might have the same benefits.
And you don't, for all I know, placebo effect is real. Like if you convince yourself, mind over body, maybe you can make your eyesight better. I have no idea, but it's enormous. I wish I could channel the placebo effect itself and feel that good.
Do we know if, we obviously don't have enough evidence on the application of these drugs for anti-aging now, but do we know that there's some populations that should not be taking these?
Well, we know, for instance, that mTOR inhibitors can disrupt fetal development in animals. So certainly pregnant women and, unless they have life-threatening illness, should not be taking an mTOR inhibitor. The mTOR is involved in growth and development, but some pediatric populations can use it. But again, you have to weigh the risk versus benefit. And for, life-threatening diseases, of course, it's worth the risk. But for healthy people, we need to really look at dose, look at duration, look at population, look at benefit, and figure this all out.
Well, our final question, unless Gail, you want to hop in with anything else?
No, I think that it was a very good discussion about mTOR and very scientific and careful, which we really like. So yeah, I think that we can wrap up, Ashley.
Yeah, and a great reminder, don't just pop the supplement.
And I didn't mention Tornado, but Tornado, in-licensed from Novartis, 82 new rapamycin derivatives that these expert rapalog chemists at Novartis made. So I do think we need to take the time, and there's other companies that also have these rapamycin derivatives that give us the patent runway to really answer these questions. So what I'd encourage is people, not Tornado, just Tornado, any company that's doing clinical trials, if you want to, figure this out and help move the field, enroll in the clinical trial would be one way to do it rather than just guessing on your own and popping a pill.
And you alluded to this a little bit before that. We know exercise works. We know sleep works. We know that eating a healthy diet works. But is there a top tip that you like to implement in your own life and are willing to share that most likely does increase health span?
Absolutely not. All things in moderation, and enjoy life, and don't obsess too much on, there's a lot of things we can't control. So I have no great insights yet, except common sense.
Good tip. Always a good tip. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Dr. Mannick.
All right. So nice. Thanks for having me.
Sure. And we look forward to exploring the research in the field of longevity each month with you and the leading scientist. For more info, please go to www.insidetracker.com/podcast.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Longevity by Design. Please subscribe to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. Longevity by Design is powered by Inside Tracker, a personalized health optimization platform that helps people improve their lives by improving their bodies from the inside out using personalized, science-backed recommendations for nutrition, supplements, and lifestyle changes. To learn more, visit insidetracker.com/podcast.